Are you an all third-party guy? Like, how's that kind of go for you? What's that workflow like?
I do not discriminate. I use everything. Lo-fi, it's like one of the dumbest plugins. I use it all the time. Signal generator, I use it all the time. In the beginning, when I did the shift, I dedicated some time to recreate a workflow that would allow me to still get that sound. In fact, a lot of people don't believe that I mix digitally only. I don't even sum outside. Like once I start my mixing on Pro Tools, that's it. I started the mix at the stadium on these headphones. Oh, wow. These very ones. Wow. You see they're all beat up and stuff. They're like all chewed up. They're very old. Wow. So I started on headphones because the stadium's acoustics was, I mean, I don't need to tell you, right? It was the freaking stadium, a locker room in the stadium. Yeah.
What's good, YouTube? You already know who it is, man. It's your boy Q, aka TheWavMan here with TheWavMonopoly.com to bring you guys our first edition of our podcast. All right, today we have the honor to be interviewing Irko. Okay, Irko is a multi-platinum engineer who worked with the likes of Kanye West, Jay-Z, Andre 3000, The Weeknd, DaBaby, Chris Brown, Lil Baby. Listen, guys, if I was to sit here and list off his credits, we'll be here all day. All right. But the main part of today is we really want to sit down. We get to sit down with a master of this art, and we get to pick the brain of them today. And we really get to see, you know, tips, tricks, gems of these upcoming engineers, artists that, want tips, these gems. We get some real gems in here. All right. Anybody creative wanting to come up in an industry, guys, we get into it today. So make sure you stay tuned. All right. But one thing we got to make sure we do before we start this video is give a very, very special shout out to my guy, BusyWorks Beats, man, for making that link. Without you, this is not possible. Shout out BusyWorks Beats. Let's get into this bang, dang, dang. Yeah.
All right.
Ooh. First of all, thank you, Irko, for stopping by and taking some time out of your day to interview with us. I really appreciate it.
Of course, man. Of course. Thanks for having me.
For sure. So today, we got to start with who Irko is and where did it all start for Irko?
Starts in a small town in Italy where I was born and raised, and my biggest passion for audio, for sound in general. I remember anytime I would get into somebody's car when I was a kid, I would like to mess with the EQs and stuff like the balance, left and right, front and back, all of that stuff.
Right.
And inevitably, the sonics of music, I kind of rediscovered when I found out hip hop music, American music. And that had so much more low end, so much more bass, so much more presence, Right. And so to me, that was what I wanted to tackle and develop and stuff like that. That being said, in my country back then, we're talking about 20, 30 years ago,
Right.
There was no internet. There was no, now in one of these, you got everything, right? All the music you might ever want to hear. It was a very different story back then, So even getting CDs and tapes and vinyl was, a mission,
Right, for sure.
Especially stuff coming from the other side of the planet,
Right.
So that's how we kind of started, got it, fell in love with hip hop music, or just music in general, actually, as a secondary step of my passion for audio. So to me, it was audio first, then music, and then music just happened to be the vehicle with which, of course, audio gets consumed, right?
Right.
And that's what it is, an audio nerd since birth, I guess.
So back then in those days where there's no DSPs, there's no Spotify, there's no Apple, no iTunes, none of that at all. How, I would assume that Italy has its own genre of music. What was your first taste of hip hop in a time where music wasn't as internationally accessible?
There was definitely no hip hop in Italy at all up until, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, 10 years ago or something like. And even then it was like, what is this thing? This guy is just talking, that kind of thing. Right. And it's interesting too, because when I first started to understand the whole culture and everything, I did not speak English. So to me, it's kind of like, ba, 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 ba. I didn't know,
right.
It's
right.
But then, of course, learning English and everything, I discovered the beautiful culture that surrounds the music, and eventually, being a guest in this space has been giving me so much, But yeah, no. So locally, yeah, there's definitely Italian music, and back then it was, whatever you can picture it to be. If you listen to any like kind of, gangsters movies music in it, that's exactly it, right? So very distant from what I actually was passionate about, and that also meant that because there was no kind of music that I was into around me, there was no studio where I could have gone to intern and kind of learn, how stuff was done. So back then it was reading Scratch magazine or Mix magazine, it was like going through pages and see, if they were talking about Dre's techniques for mixing Chronic, the first one or the second one, that kind of stuff,
Right.
In fact, I remember reading, I think it was a Mix magazine interview or an article about him. I think he was doing maybe a Snoop record, or maybe it could have been maybe the beginning of the Aftermath. So like this Chronic 2001, that era of his music. And the article said that he would run an RCA cable out of the studio into the parking lot and plug it into his car to test the mixes in the car in real time, right?
References.
So you better believe I did that as soon as I could.
Wow. That's actually wild. My first thing that comes to my mind is with you saying you being, probably the only person that around that area getting into the genre of hip hop. What was your setup? Like, how did you even approach getting close to that sound that you're, trying to replicate? What was that approach and how was that setup like?
Yeah, it was, well, first of all, because I couldn't ask anybody how to do this or how to do that, it was all by comparison. It was a game of A-Bing stuff, right? I got my mix going on, gotta compare it to some, Jay-Z or Nas record or Bad Boy stuff, whatever, right? And it was like that. And it was a constant understanding of what am I lacking? How do I get to that point? How do I get to that? Because that was my frame of reference. And until my stuff was not comparable or compatible or even just remotely close to that area, I just didn't stop. It was just, I had to keep going. This was years in the making,
Right.
And so it was very difficult, but I did have a little bit of, some hints of help here and there. Back in the day and still nowadays, there used to be this portal called Gear Sluts, and that helped a lot.
Yeah, wow.
But the downside of that, so this was the early stage of the internet, right? But the downside of those kind of portals is that you have anyone that speaks and you don't really know who's who, right? Like it's very difficult. But there was Jimmy D actually replied to me one time, and I think the connection may have started on Gear Sluts, but I believe that our exchange actually happened on email.
Okay.
Anyway, legendary engineer. I was interested in understanding his point of perspective on the work that he has done with Timbaland. That was one of my biggest influences, production-wise, right? And I asked him, and the guy actually replied. Wow. Unbelievable. He actually was able to give me some pointers, which I totally implied. In fact, look, I'm still sitting in front of the machine that he told me to get to the vocals right here.
Wow.
Again, 25 years later, right?
Wow. Still here and being emulated to this day.
Yeah.
Wow. So
it was difficult, not having mentors or not having someone to just call and ask for help, whatever. Very difficult. And that's why the progress definitely happened, but it took, a decade, when today the same progress could happen in maybe 2 years at the very most.
Right. I feel you. So pretty much that learning curve was a lot longer because that technology era didn't quite hit like it's hitting today, where you can just look on YouTube and find literally anything, and just a quick Google search will give you any answer. Definitely understand you. So now, if I'm correct, you moved when you came from Italy. You first moved to New York, correct? Okay, cool. So with that being said, by that time when you moved to New York, what was your like experience level? Did you believe at that time like that you were good enough to sit in the room with, the biggest artists of today and confidently engineer those artists? Like looking back, I would say how much room was there still to grow from that time?
Yeah. So my philosophy has always been to be the best. Imagine if we're talking about the mixing, right? The best mixer in my household, which is easy. Then the best mixer in my block, a little bit more difficult. And then the next will be the city, and then the region, and then the country, and then eventually worldwide, right? And so, of course, every one of these steps is incrementally more difficult. But it was, of course, a process that had to, that took a long time. When I went to New York was 2006. And at the time I was recording, editing, tuning vocals, mixing, mastering. I was doing everything. I was even still producing a little bit at the time. Very little bit, but still a little bit. So obviously when your heart and attention and focus is divided between all of these different tasks, however related they are, obviously recording is very much related to editing and mixing, and it's kind of like the same process, right? But inevitably, when you're focused on 6 things, you have 1/6 of your attention at the most on each.
Right.
So eventually, of course, I started to remove things that I was feeling less productive, or that I would be just less efficient, or I would just feel like I would be better off investing my time and energy in something else. That was mixing for me.
Right.
So in 2006, I was still doing a lot of stuff. I was, I did some records for Jennifer Lopez because I was editing, because recording, because of, tuning and all of that stuff, right? Great, amazing. But eventually I knew I wanted to do mixing. And so eventually I just dropped everything. And nowadays that's all I do, basically. I don't even remember the last time I did a recording session. Although here I could totally do that, but I allocate that kind of work for my chief house engineer, which does only that, So yeah, I think it's one of the things, whenever you reduce what you offer, you have a better chance of becoming great at that one task,
right?
And so that's what I did.
Right. I definitely agree with you on that, because even in my case where I'm running a company, those tasks that really take up a lot of time though, but other people can get those done as efficiently or even better than me. I need to put those people in place, and I feel those people are better suited in those places where I can be, better suited in a place where I can move the company forward. So I definitely get what you're saying when you say, mastering that one craft can really, hyper focus, which will allow you to become greater at that actual task.
So
yeah, there's also a conversation to be had about where this happens. In a smaller market, an operation like a recording studio most likely will have a lot more offering, meaning like you will probably do a lot more because the client might expect to come in and walk out with a finished product just by talking to one guy instead of multiple people.
Right.
But if you're in a bigger market and at a higher level of the music industry, usually things are a lot more compartmentalized and things happen in different spaces, different studios, different people, things like that.
Right.
So when you were moving to New York, or when you were even in that process of thinking about moving to New York, what, first of all, made you, feel like you could, actually make this audio engineering, as a lot of people would call a hobby, you know what I'm saying, or a far shot dream, an actual career, and what actually gave you that confidence to move and do that?
The confidence happened because I was 25 years old without knowing, when they say you don't know what you don't know? Yeah, that was me.
Okay.
I just kind of I was like, yeah, sure, I'm going to go to New York, yeah, why not,
Right.
But, a little bit of luck and a little bit of, 10 years of preparation before that, it kind of blossomed and worked itself out, I guess, when I often tell the story that I was in New York for 3 weeks and I came back home to Italy with a double platinum award for working with Jay-Z. Wow. And it did happen exactly like that, but it wasn't like that. It wasn't like, oh, I just show up, JFK, and the next thing I know, I'm in the studio. It doesn't work like that, of course, you know.
Right.
So yeah, so
before.
for years, like a decade before that day. Yeah, of course.
Right.
And so yeah, so in the confident thing, I don't know if I'm today I'm confident about what I do. You know, I just do the best I can, and you know, it depends who you're working with. Music is very personal. There are some things that are not really debatable because they're just flat out. You know, you can read those, and you can get computers to give you readouts of a frequency response, for example, right? So you know that is objective, but is that the correct one? No one knows. You know, it's up to taste, of course.
Right. Because I was gonna say, like, you know, getting that type of placement, that could definitely start, you know, rolling things forward. So what I'm thinking is, like, how did you actually go about, you know, using that leverage and leveraging that into your next big project? Was it a type of thing that snowballed in, or was it not as, you know, didn't come like that? Because, you know, for me at least, I'm not the type to, you know, if I'm working with a big producer, you know, I don't really just go, you know, telling people, because sometimes people can look at that as, you know, boasting or bragging, flexing. So it's like, so my question to you is, how did you go about leveraging that accolade, as well as how did you go about, you know, kind of moving that forward and having that snowball and spiral into your next big step?
Mm-hmm. Since day one, I always promoted what I do in very fitting to me kind of way. Like, I've never like bought ads or things like that. I don't need to do that. But I'm very interested in letting the world know what I'm about. So, you know, I'm kind of recognizable, you know, the bow ties, and I drive interesting cars, and, you know, all of that stuff is kind of like a little bit of my signature, my Italianism, you know, my accent and all. So I do let the world know about that, but the vast majority of work comes through work. So, you know, whenever I kill a mix for this one song, chances are that there's several people involved in that process: producers, songwriters, artists, managers, labels, A&Rs, investors, you name it, whatever, you know? And so if I kill this one record and there's like 5 people involved, the next time one of these 5 people are in need of a mix, chances are they're going to call me.
Right.
So that's kind of how the thing kind of multiplies and grows. And also, you know, when you're working amongst your peers, again, chances are they grow with you. Right. So, you know, your buddy that may not have any placements today, in 6 years, he may be on top of the game. And if you guys are buddy and grew up together, chances are there's no one party that's stronger or bigger than the other, right? You guys grow together. So the people that I was working with back then in New York 15 years ago, I still talk to every day. Right. And they're still my peers, and we still, you know, work together, you know?
Exactly. So you're saying pretty much, you know, collaborating with peers amongst your level so that we can build that camaraderie as a group. And when one goes up, you know, we kind of bring each other, or we grab each other by the, you know, by the neck, as they would say, you know, grab them up, you know, we lifting our brothers up. I think that's really dope, because nowadays, you know, everybody looks at those high level artists only, and they want to make those records, which I understand, you know, but there's really levels to it. And what you're saying is you've been able to kind of grow amongst your peers, and those same people who you never knew if they're going to get that big placement that's going to throw them into that stratosphere that, you know, they look back and say, hey, this person I work with and can bring you up as well. I think that's a really dope concept. So something people can really take heed of, to really build those relationships and, you know, really build those and nurture them so that they're able to get to that next level with each other. That's really dope.
So yeah, absolutely. Cool. And, you know, the extra mile kind of mentality, you know, going beyond what you're getting paid to do or getting hired to do, and just deliver more than what the client gives you.
True. That's
usually the best way to have grow relationships and stuff like that. Not to say that I get taken advantage of, but just, you know, be very happy to give the extra mile. You know, I'm always the one that ends up doing another card test, even if the producer approved the mix. Just, you know, just to be sure. Then the next day, let me see if I hear something. And sometimes I do. Right. So, you know, you want to be able to do that extra something. You know, if I'm asked to deliver 4 stems of the mix, I might deliver 6. Cost me almost nothing.
Exactly.
Why not?
No, exactly. It's actually crazy that you said that because, going above and beyond, really, I feel like not enough people do. And you saying that just proves another level that even, that could be something that brought you to the level that you're at today, just doing more than that's asked of you. I remember I was doing a mix the other day and it was kind of bland in a way. It wasn't super bland, but it was just probably like 2 vocal tracks and, the 2-track. So what I went ahead and did was I kind of filled it out and made it more musical, I guess you can say, by adding some backing vocals, and I actually added a choir into it as well. And just added that just to do, like you said, because like you said, just over deliver. And I think the vocal production really, added to that track, and he did as well. So that turned out very well. A happy client, free of charge. Backing vocals probably took me an extra 5 minutes to do. So I definitely understand what you're saying. So moving forward a little bit with Donda. We know you mixed Donda, which is multi-platinum at this point. But I did look up and did some research, and I seen that you did 88 Keys and Kanye probably about 13 years ago. Back in 2009, you mixed the record for 88 Keys and Kanye West. I believe it's called Stay Up. And I also looked and saw that 88 Keys was also credited on Donda. So just going back to what you were saying about building amongst your peers, that was in 2009. And fast forward into 2022, you guys find yourselves again working together on, probably one of the best albums of the year, So that goes to show that as well. As well. And so that kind of goes to show how building with your peers and, working on something 13 years later goes back to what you were saying, building amongst your peers. But what I wanted to ask you was how, times changed. That was in 2009. It's 2022. Times change. Technology changes. A lot of things change, a lot of things. So how, what are some of those changes that you found going from, working on that original record and the changes, to 2022? What are some of those changes?
The biggest change for sure is that back then I was on consoles.
Oh, wow.
And nowadays I'm on Pro Tools only. So that has shifted everything, going from the analog realm and switching over to the digital one. That changed everything for sure. It's a lot. There's, it's a different workflow, although some things are very much similar, but there's a lot more advantages in the digital realm. Obviously, infinite changes that you can do at any point of time, and you have a lot more accessibility to doing automations and get creative with things. There's a lot more stuff to it. But on the downside of that is, when you're working in a digital realm, there's a little bit more of a, it's so clean, which is sometimes not that great of a thing, because it's everything is so pristine.
Right.
You're looking for that dirt, that dusty sound, that humph, the greasy thing, which consoles can give you. Right. So, in the beginning when I did the shift, I dedicated some time to recreate a workflow that would allow me to still get that sound. In fact, a lot of people don't believe that I mix digitally only. I don't even sum outside. Like once I start my mixing on Pro Tools, that's it.
Wow.
And that goes even for other projects. Like I've done Black Thought from the Roots. I did an album with him 2 years ago, whatever. No one believed that thing was digital because it had so much samples and stuff. Chauncey's incredible producer, very similar to 88 Keys, by the way, a very similar approach with a lot of analog stuff or an analog sounding samples, right? Both use MPCs and all of that stuff. So yeah, it was about recreating the sound I'm known for with different tools.
Wow.
And again, it's not really about the gear, but it's about the ear, right? And as long as you got that.
Wow. That's right. So you're totally mixing in the box. Like, that's crazy. That's crazy. So that leads me to ask you then, with analog and that big debate on analog versus, plugins, is there even that real difference that you feel that there is between analog hardware and the plugins? And even if it's incrementally, and is it even really there if music is such a, subjective thing where people can say, oh, I hear depth in this whether or not. So what's your take on the analog versus plug-in debate?
There's definitely differences, yes. But it's a different in the tool more than anything.
Okay.
If the engineer is looking to give this record depth, they will be able to achieve it. It's just that that's what they need to work on. Now, as a commentary of somebody else's work, somebody listens to it and is like, there's no depth. Well, that's the call of the engineer, not the tool.
True.
And that's my 2022 answer. If you asked me that 20 years ago, the answer would be very different, you know?
Right.
The plugins are so much better now. You know, back then they were gimmicks. They were, little toys.
Wow.
Now it's serious.
Wow, for sure. So just working on Donda and being called into that, that opportunity and being that man, how was it getting that call, and what was your mindset going into that creative album, such a creative album?
I started the mix at the stadium on these headphones.
Oh, wow.
These very ones.
Wow.
You see they're all beat up and stuff. They're like all chewed up. They're very old.
Wow.
So I started on headphones because the stadium's acoustics was, I don't need to tell you, right? It was the freaking stadium, a locker room in the stadium. Right. Yeah. So I did that for about a week. And then after that, I did, I want to say 3-4 days at a studio, which was a lot better. And it was revealing, because finally I was off the speaker. I was off the headphones onto speakers. And it was like, oh, wait a minute. And then after maybe 4 days or something like that, I flew back here to LA and I finished it here, which was, I was like, oh yes, finally I get to really hear what the hell is going on here, And so the rest of the work happened here, and it took me about a month all in to mix the whole thing with the revisions and everything, which was a lot because considering, 32 songs, it was a lot. I ran through the whole process. I wish I had another 2 weeks or something like that, of course, but
So were those songs actually made at the stadium, or how was that recording process? Because I could imagine if it was, all recorded, or even some was recorded in that actual locker room, I'd be sure that there'd be some type of reverberation issues that would probably take some masking during the mixing stages. So how was kind of that recording process and just those stems, working with those stems? How was that?
Yeah, the production for that album spanned over years. So stuff has been produced, written, recorded throughout years.
Right.
Some recording has happened at the stadium, yes. But I would say smaller stuff. Now, I'm just saying, what I'm told and what I've seen. I was not involved in the recording, so I'm not fully sure, but I'm pretty sure it was, spread out over a long time.
Right.
And some things, like, for example, I know a couple of verses have been recorded there.
Right.
But when I was in the room, in the studio, in the mixing studio room, locker room, I guess,
right.
There were other rooms next door that were being used for other things. And,
wow.
I was just there like, there was no food, no nothing, it was just
man.
That's wild for real. So when you're dealing with such a creative and, you're coming into this mixing stage, what kind of gives you that direction where you're pushing that music? Because being an engineer, you have a large control over that creative process and the sound that the actual, record comes out to be. So, with that creative direction, does that come maybe directly from Kanye? Do you receive like some type of, how much creative control do you actually, have over these records, or is it more of a collaborative effort? Through, maybe down a line of command, a chain of command. How's that process kind of go?
Yeah, it depends. There were some where the treatment was clearly there, and so even the rough mix had that intent. Now, from that to the actual mix, though, there was like miles of work that had to be done, to dial in the sonics and everything. Some were completely naked, zero treatment whatsoever. So I did the whole thing from scratch to my taste. Of course, when we're talking about guests, a lot of these artists have their kind of signature sound. So not to mimic their stuff or whatever, I did still my own, the Irko vision of it, but respecting what they're known for and stuff like that. I don't want to reinvent their sound, it would be disrespectful to them. Who am I to say, oh, this should be different? So I respect their vision and go with that, unless it's asked to do something different, of course. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag it depends on the situation and what was called and what was fitting to the song too, because there's some episodes on the album where there's no drums, there's no bass. It's just almost a dark side of the moon kind of approach, right? And then there's some other ones where like super, 808 driven, big bass kind of thing where it's more like a standard kind of hip hop. Though, of course, I put, my bow tie sound onto it.
Right.
But I need to respect that, But all in all, Ye gave me some directions on, especially for vocal treatments, and I respected that. But music-wise, like all the beats, that's pretty much all my choices in terms of the mixing. For the vast majority, like over 32 songs, it's more or less all of my vision. There were a few where, I tried an approach, didn't work. So I rethought the whole thing and went about it a different way. And then there were some other situations in which there were some producers' input where they were like, oh, let's do this, let's change this, let's change that, which I'm always open to.
Right.
And then, yeah, it's a collaborative effort,
Wow, that's really dope. I definitely understand. It's definitely about communication and making sure that the client is happy, as well as, you're happy with the mix that you're putting out there into the world, because, we got to keep that integrity of our work as well, while still keeping in mind that, we are kind of that assisting part of, their overall vision. So it's about keeping that integrity and still being happy with the mix, because we don't want to put a mix out in the world that we're not, happy with. So I definitely understand you with that communication part and collaborative effort that it takes to come out with these amazing records. So for sure, I definitely get you. So I gotta throw this out there. I'm just gonna be starting to ask some more technical-ish type of questions. More getting into mixing. So I guess the first thing I would like to know, and of course the audience would like to know, would be where does a mix, kind of start for you? Where does that mix start for you?
So the first step is for me to get familiar with the song itself. So knowing the structure, how it develops, the BPM, what does what, what part is placed where, those kind of things. Once I'm familiarized with the layout of the session and the multi-tracks, and I know where everything is and things like that, that's when I start the actual mix. Usually these things I'm describing are different days, different times. I don't really like get going on one song and do the whole thing in one go. And then as far as the actual mixing work, I start usually with the biggest thing. So whatever that means, usually it's the chorus, that's the loudest part. And then usually in that part, it's the low end, the kick and the bass, 808s, that kind of stuff. But not necessarily. Sometimes it might be the vocal, So whatever the biggest means in our application, I will look into it and rock with that. And my thinking is, because the low end is usually the elements that take the most sonic space, I gotta allocate that real estate to the biggest things and then gradually go to the smaller things, kind of like how you want to fill up a trunk. You want to put in the big luggage first and then the medium size and then only at the end the small things.
Wow. I've never heard it like that. Wow. So when it comes to, kind of getting that depth that, people often speak of when they're, referring to music. And I've heard engineers say that they don't even use reverbs. They use delays as reverbs, different things like that. But more so I want to ask you, do you use reverbs? And when you are using reverbs, does it get super technical to where you're calculating pre-delay times, or are you more of a feel type of person when you're mixing those records? How do you go about those things?
In all of my mixing, I'm definitely a feeling kind of guy. I don't really look at the numbers like that. I guess the only part of that I'm very peculiar with is my bussing and my gain staging, to make sure that I'm not clipping or, generating, something that could be detrimental to the mix. Right. So for that, I'm a lot more detailed. But as far as reverb times, delays, and things like that, I'm not super peculiar with those kind of things. I do have my usual suspects that I use on my effects. I'm a big 480L lexicon kind of guy.
Right.
Yeah, but not only. I mean, I use just about anything. I don't discriminate.
Cool. So when you're sent a mix, because on this channel, I like to teach a lot of things like gain staging, things in those those pre-stages that can really like deter a mix and kind of ruin it from the start. I kind of want to know, like, is there, when you're receiving a mix, what are those more so common issues that you find yourself commonly going to, where you could kind of most times, almost guarantee that you're gonna have to kind of touch this up pretty much every time you touch a mix? Are there any of those common mistakes that engineers or producers, commonly do when they send that mix over, that you find yourself just I don't even want to say mistakes, but just things that they do that you have to go in and kind of tweak almost every time? Just something that's more so common that you could let us know that we can fix our mixes before we can mess them up. Is there anything like that? Something common?
Absolutely. Overproduction is probably the number one issue that I gotta work with. Right. And by overproduction, I mean when there's too much stuff. When you want to have a nice plate, you do want to have all your seasonings and stuff. But if you put all the seasonings you got in your pantry,
true,
it's like tasting white noise, right? And it's the same thing on music. Less is more, no doubt about that, and there's no way around that.
Right.
So a lot of times I find a track with a song with 200 tracks, and it's like, okay, can you name me 200 instruments? You can't, because there is no 200 instruments. So that's like the most common issue to be that I often find. And that's because nowadays there's no limitations in computer tracks and stuff like that. Back in the day, when you were on tape or mixers, what you got is what you got, and that's it.
But no, that's true. That's definitely true.
That's the number one thing.
With technology comes those pros and cons, where limitations are limitless now. So what used to have to be a 4 or 8 track, a 2 track, literally can be a 200 track. So definitely in our day and age, less can definitely be more. But that takes us to the next thing, which is T-Pain. And I don't want to, we're not going to say T-Pain created autotune, because I'm sure it was there before, but I want to know, like, how was it then, I'm talking about before the T-Pain days with autotune. Like, was that pitch correction was there? Because what I know Cher had a track, do you believe in love? So she had autotune on that track, but from what I know, it's more of a secret type of thing. So how was that back in those days before T-Pain with autotune and pitch correction?
Yeah, for a while it wasn't clear what it even was. People thought it was a vocoder, or it was this or that, because people didn't know.
Right.
And then eventually it came out. Yeah. But I think actually T-Pain was probably not at the very big, like early in that stage. Now, for urban music, for sure, he was probably, it still is, kind of like you can almost not mention autotune with T-Pain, right? They kind of go together.
Right. But there's always been tuning going on back then, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. For sure. And at the beginning, also, it was not used as clearly, like it was used as a correction tool,
right.
And then he used it as an effect, like straight up,
right?
Jack it all the way up, and that's what we got.
Wow, that is wild.
I'm not against that either, by the way. Like, it's just a tool, and that's his thing. You don't like it, you don't have to listen to him.
Right. And it's also even kind of hard to even find music with autotune not on the track. Even if it's just a little bit of autotune, I definitely know that that's still there. So, yeah, for sure. Yeah. So just getting into some like myth busting type of things, and just, some information I know the people will want to know is just, when it comes to third party and stock plugins, like, what's your take on third party versus stock plugins? Do you use stock plugins, or are you an all third party guy? Like, how's that kind of go for you? What's that workflow like?
I do not discriminate. I use everything. Lo-fi, it's like one of the dumbest plugins. I use it all the time.
Right.
The signal generator, I use it all the time. Stock. There's so many things that I use all the time. You know, the little EQ. You know, with the one band, the forgot what it's called, the white one with the black screen.
And Pro Tools.
I use that all the time.
Right.
Yeah. The Q7 and the Q1, I think it's called.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
Wow.
All the time. Reverb. Use it all the time. You know. Yeah. Absolutely. It doesn't matter. You know. There's always a place for these things. You know, and if they work, by all means. You know.
Perfect. So, do's and don'ts for being in a recording studio setting.
Oh man, there's a lot. If we're talking about a recording engineer, it's the best. So the how can I say? So the one of the greatest things about recording people is that if you can get to be as neutral as possible, like personality wise, presence wise, you're there to help, you're there to support, and that's it. You know, I've seen some situations in which a recording engineer had a say-so in the artistic expression of the client. Not even the client, just the musician, the artist, right? The talent.
Right.
You don't do that. Like,
right.
Even if asked, I wanna even stretch it to that point. Even if asked,
wow.
You know, the answer should be something like this. You know, like
right.
No input. You know,
not too
like,
clear. Just.
You know, I maybe that's too much, but you know what I mean. Like you need to be as neutral as possible. I think so. That's one thing. Cool. Another thing would be to be always ready and foresee what the need may be, whatever that is. It might be water. It might be as simple as like a little mini jack to plug up headphones or something like that. You know, so those things are very important. How to house and have guests coming into a space that's not theirs and have them be as comfortable as possible.
True.
And there's so many different things, you know, lights, temperature, comfortable seatings and whatever, you know, whatever it is, you know. Like, for example, like I'm very big on lighting right now. We have this harsh, hideous light that I never use.
Okay.
But I don't know if you saw, but Angelo's doing some work on my mains right now. So of course he needs lights. So that's all. But I would never have a session with these bank-like lights, you know?
Right. No,
that's another example. Same thing with the air, you know, you definitely want to make sure that you have fresh air in the studio. And things like that, you know? It's, you know, I like to think of the studio service to be like a 5-star hotel, you know, where everything is available to the person that's here quickly, promptly, in the cleanest manner, and so they hopefully come back.
So my next question is going to be what's your kind of take, because this is of course your opinion, your workflow, when it comes to mixing into a bus compressor. Is that something that, you know, you practice, or is that kind of something you don't do? Is it something you kind of sometimes do? Like, what's your process with that tip that I sometimes hear, which is to mix into a bus compressor?
I have nothing on my master bus until my mix is dialed in and works. So I want to say about 80% of my time spent on a song is without anything on the masters or the buses, not like literally nothing. It's just a pure mix. And the reason why I do that is because I want to make sure that whatever movement I make on the actual mixer does not get messed with at the master level, at the master bus level. And so my workflow is to do everything. Once I'm happy with it, then I work on my buses treatment, which is very minimal, but it's enough to make a little bit of a difference. This is where basically I trimmed off every fast transients that go over a certain limit. Again, very small things, nothing major here, you know? But now that I have the 4 major groups that I work with, music, bass, drums, and vocals, and they are all relatively contained in their dynamic range, now they get summed together. And at that stage, I have another set of dynamic controls that do the same, basically, in a different manner, but it's essentially the same thing. I plop that in at the very end. So by the time I got that on, we're about, I don't know, maybe 3 hours away from sending out mix 1 to the client. So no, I mix with nothing on for the vast majority of the time. Yeah.
Right. Perfect. So So what's your kind of views on templates? Because I feel like that's that big elephant in the room where people have very strong opinions on templates. So asking, a master engineer like you, is that something that, falls into your workflow with templates? Or is that something you stay away from and go totally scratch from the jump?
I do have a template. However, my template is more like an empty box where all the tools that I might want are available, but not on. So it's not like I'm dropping the kick drum track into a prefab, kick track with my treatment on. I don't do that. And the reason for that is because obviously every track is different, goes without saying. But more than that is that I want to custom make the treatment based on the actual data that I have in front of me. So although, yes, more likely than not, I will have a parallel treatment on the kick drum. More likely than not, I'll have some harmonic content generator related to the kick drum and so forth. I like to choose and pick, the one treatment for the one kick rather than have everything there. But if a lot of people, some of my colleagues do use templates where they have everything there. And so instead of looking for the plugin or the treatment that fits the kick drum, they have already several treatments there and they just move the track to their different treatments and see whatever works best for them. So I'm not knocking it. It's just not the way I do it. Whatever works, right?
Right. So I want to ask you something. So basically being a mix engineer, you were mastering your records before. I know you said you like to, stick to your one, your craft where you want to master it, but you mastered your records before, correct? Or you ever mastered like your records before?
The other way around. For the longest, I have not mastered my mixes because I was scared. I was afraid of it. I didn't really know what to expect or to do. So I didn't. So I would always outsource it. And then about maybe 4 or 5 years ago or something, I was like, you know what? Let me rethink this. Instead of thinking mastering is a necessary step after my mix, which it is. But when you think it's necessary, you also kind of think that you can rely on it to fix issues or address things or whatever. And anytime we do address things and fix things at the mastering level, it's always a little bit of like I just have to do it this way, and it's a solution that I have because there's no other solutions because the mix is closed. Right. So my thinking has changed since then, and now my mastering is literally just a limiter that bumps up the volume by a little bit. Period. That's it. So any necessity of fixing anything at the mastering level that I will notice, I will just address in the mix. So I'm like, okay, this whole song could use a little bit more bass. Well, shit, instead of putting an EQ on the whole 2-track mix,
just fix
I can go to the bass, turn up the 808, I'm done. And now I'm only turning up the one thing I do want, not everything. Which is a lot better, right? So I stopped doing that whole thing, and I'm no longer sending out mastering. I'm no longer sending out the mixes to mastering houses because I feel like it's so much more efficient to just address things at the mix level. And when I'm lucky to do albums, which I'm kind of known for doing, when I mix song 1 on Monday, song 2 on Tuesday, and so forth, I'm able to jump back and forth between different tracks to make sure that I also combine the sonics of all these different scenes of the same movie to make sure that we're now having a seamless presentation of this piece of art. And a lot of my albums that I do are like that. I work a lot on these on the thought of making sure that I can put all together as a seamless presentation. And of course, every single episode of these of this album can be a standalone, live alone kind of thing, of course. But there's also the thought of making sure everything works together. So yeah, no, I master my own mixes nowadays.
Wow. I was not expecting that at all. But that makes a lot of sense though, because And I understand a lot of people said when I was, coming up learning, mixing and mastering, they say, if you're mixing your records, don't ever master your records. But, I understand it could have that, that bias to your own records, but it's just, I feel like all about learning, your room, learning to what your brain automatically will think is a mistake so that you're not, being being a stickler onto that actual element. So I definitely understand what, that concept. And I think that's really dope that you actually master your records as well. That's really cool. So what I want to ask now would be like, in today's day and age with social media and people can learn mixing and mastering online, and really get to that level where they can make records sound really good. What would you kind of do that's going to, if you were to start over, to kind of bring yourself to the level that you're at now, what would you kind of do to get yourself to that level?
Yeah. I definitely would suggest to do the schooling path, with the disclaimer that when you get out of audio engineering schools, most of the times you don't really know how to mix an album, right? But they have usually put you in the right path to get to the destination that you want to get to. Also, placement. A lot of these big schools have a way to get you into studios where it's very difficult to get to just on your own, and that can consist of a shortcut to get to places, sessions, people, producers that you might want to get in contact with or work for. And so I would say that, yeah, absolutely. And then the next thing to that would be to find your persona as your business, as you as an engineer, whatever the case may be, no one can tell you what your thing will be, with me, I'm kind of like the bow tie Italian dude with the weird car that does hip hop music, that's kind of strange and kind of marketable, yeah. But maybe your thing is that you only do K-pop and your hair is blue. I don't know. Whatever it is.
Right. And it's pretty much just like branding. The same way. Right. The same way artists will have to brand themselves. To have to have their sound, their look. It's kind of the same way all throughout the industry. You have to have something that you're kind of known for, and people can attach to you and be able to keep you outside that getting lost in the sauce, as a lot of people would say. So I definitely get you on that.
Yeah, totally. And of course, needless to say, you got to kill it. You got to be the best of the best, So of course, your 10,000 hours are like only the very beginning. Like you got to really put your heart and soul and dedication. And, and also you got to be aware if you're if you have the personality for this, because it's not simple, the music industry is brutal. You got to be very good with money. You got to be very good with people and communication and obviously music and computers and all of that stuff, and it takes a long time too. That's the thing, if you're looking for instant gratification, you need to go work at some fast food joint so that you can get a paycheck in 2 weeks. It's not like that.
Nah, that's true. It's funny. It's actually crazy because, like you said, you have to understand if you're fit for this type of business because, for instance, I remember when I was going to college, my original thought was that I wanted to be a lawyer, but I remembered you had to go to law school for probably like 2 to 4 years. I'm not sure. It might be 2. I believe it's 2 extra years. And me as a person, I knew that I couldn't go to college for extra 2 years. So I definitely did not go that route. But it's funny because it took even longer to make even $1 off of music. So it's one of those things you really got to put in that time and energy, and work, passion, and everything you got into this music. So I definitely get you. And with that being said, Irko, I want to thank you, for coming onto this podcast.
Of course,
and,
man. Thank you for having me.
I definitely want everybody to know that Irko has a YouTube channel where he goes into building his studio that he has in LA. Okay, if you're in LA, Irko got that. He got that studio. So make sure you check out his YouTube. All right. I think it's Irko Studio Beats. I'll let him introduce it.
Yeah. Just put Irko Studio Beats. That's my online social media for everything, Instagram, YouTube, and all. There's a very cool series of 37 episodes today of how I built this building right here. So, we turned this from a parking lot to then a hole in the ground to then this.
No, that's
and so Yeah, if you're interested in that, definitely go check it out. And it's like almost 3 hours of content all together, and it goes from the design phase to the construction, heavy construction, the concrete and all, until we made this place looking like this. So yeah, definitely go check it out. And just put Irko on YouTube, it'll pop
right. And also, guys, if you're interested, like I said, if you're interested in YouTube videos from literally recording go-go bands, recording other artists, make sure you check out Irko's channel. It's really dope. I watch him myself. He's a master at his craft, and I want to thank you again, Irko, for sitting down with us. And that was the first episode, guys. See you at the next one. Dondos!